We had, I think 3 people in the session just before this one. I wonder if they'll hop over.
Hop over. Yeah, I should have joined that one. I need help with my Google Drive. It was organized at one point, back to disorganization.
I used to organize it every summer, but then I just stopped.
Yep.
I did a Flipgrid for high school math session today.
Oh, nice. How did it go?
Better than I thought. I was nervous because I hardly ever work with that age group or math specifically.
Yeah, but I feel like Flipgrid is generic enough.
Yeah, I found some cool examples for math, like the Matt Miller, like unboxing.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I know.
Yeah, they thought that was a fun idea. Or like put up a, what mistake did I make? You know, put up a slide with a mistake and then they have to figure out what you did wrong.
Oh, nice. That's a great idea. I would do that anyway, because I was always making mistakes in my lesson plans. I'm like, oh, looks like we have a mistake to find today.
I think it's better for the teacher to say that than be like, oh, somebody made a mistake last night in the homework. Because I've had that done to me where like a teacher was like, this writing example is horrible or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was mine. And then everyone laughs.
Cool. You're like, awesome. I think I need to go to the bathroom. Well, let's see. I'm going to pause the recording. Okay, so welcome. We're going to talk about Hyperdocs today. And I love Hyperdocs because they're just a super simple, very flexible tool that can be used in lots of different ways. And I see that Kate's joining us. Welcome, Kate. So I invite you to put in the chat, if you feel comfortable, a memorable mixtape or song from way back in the day when mixtapes were popular. So I had playing a little bit earlier, Janie and I, Sugar Ray Fly, like that just takes me right back to living in the moment, my 14-year-old self at the beach, just feeling it. I'm ready for summer. So if you have a memorable mixtape or song that takes you back to a different place and time, I invite you to put that into the chat. And I'll explain why in just a moment, besides that it's nice for a little time travel. Yes, obviously, Kate is putting "This Is How We Do It" by Montel Jordan. Yes. All right, well, this is how we do Hyperdocs. I'm going to go ahead and get started. And welcome, Jenna's just coming in. Welcome, Jenna, to Hyped on Hyperdocs. Okay, so the reason that I shared, I had you put a song or a mixtape that you received, or a mixtape that you made, or a song that takes you back in time. And the reason is, to me, I really feel like Hyperdocs are sort of like the mixtapes of lessons. So it's a way for you, thanks, Janie's putting the link in the chat. Thank you, Janie. It's a way for you to sort of take all of your content, all of your pieces that you might need for a lesson or for a unit, and to put them all in one place. Yes, thank you, Gian Philadelphia, freedom. So I love Hyperdocs because they're easy to put together, but they end up being this super interactive tool. And also, just like the way that if you've ever had a friend or maybe a partner gift you a mixtape, the way that all of the songs, the sort of start, which one you choose to start with and put in the middle and what's next, they come together into this beautiful flow. And so that is sort of like a Hyperdoc. It becomes this flow of your lesson plan or your unit, and it puts all the pieces together, and they become more meaningful and more powerful in the order that you put them in and the way that you curate them. So we're going to get very meta today, and we are going to look at a Hyperdoc on Hyperdocs. So if you want to go to this link, and I'll go ahead and put it in the chat, it will take you to our task for today. Our Hyperdoc on Hyperdocs. And our first job is that this is going to be a sort of pared down version of a Hyperdoc. We're just going to have 3 pieces today: explore, explain, and apply. And like I said, Hyperdocs are amazing because they can be as simple or as complex as you want them to be. So for today's purpose, we've pared it down to just 3 pieces. And the first thing I'd like you to do is sort of the anticipatory set, or the getting hooked on Hyperdocs, is to look at this explore part. So when you open the link that's in the chat, it will take you here, and you can either just work on it the way it is like this, or if you want to be able to edit and make revisions to it, you could file, make a copy, and save it for later. But what I'd like you to do is just go ahead and review the example Hyperdoc that is linked in the Explore section. And then your task is to put in the chat what you think a Hyperdoc is and what you already know about the 2 words that make up that combination word Hyperdoc, and go ahead and put that in the chat. So take about 2 minutes here to look at the example Hyperdoc, and then your job is to put in the chat, what do you think a Hyperdoc is? Or what do you already know? All right. Take the next 30 seconds to finish looking at that linked example Hyperdoc. We are such a small group today. You can either put in the chat, what do you think a Hyperdoc is? Or you could unmute your mic and just go ahead and share.
I'm sorry, I wasn't able to find how to get back to the place to put in. It looks like it's similar to like an agenda, a format for the lesson. Just from briefly, going over the example, but in addition, like I said, it includes links and connect the technology.
Great. Yeah, thanks for sharing. That's a perfect way to describe it, as sort of like an agenda or lesson plan. So there's lots of different ways to conceptualize Hyperdocs, and that's a great way to think of them. And they have all your pieces and those links in one place. And thank you, Jenna added in the chat, a Hyperdoc is a document full of live links. Students can move through it at their own pace or with the class. And Janie added a doc with hyperlinks, and it helps with organization just like a lesson plan or an agenda would. Great. All right. So we are going to continue to learn a little bit more about Hyperdocs. And just like a lesson plan or an agenda, Hyperdoc always begins with strong lesson design. And it's a way for us to curate or collect that instructional content. And the order that you put things in and the collection of them together helps to create meaning for your students. Because students are able to move through it at their own pace, because they have a clear sort of scope and sequence, it helps to package learning in a way that engages your learners. And because it can include those external links like Janie stated, it's also engaging. You can include YouTube videos, music, other pieces like firsthand documents. So all of those things come together to make the lesson or the unit really come alive. It also can encourage collaboration. Just like in that first piece where we had the explore, your task was to put in the chat or to share what you learned about Hyperdocs. So you can build in that collaboration and give your students voice with the Hyperdoc. At the end, the goal of a Hyperdoc is that you find some way for your students to create or share some artifact or authentic product that helps develop their critical thinking and problem-solving skills. And again, it can be self-directed or teacher-led. A really good tip is that if you or your students aren't familiar with using Hyperdocs together, a great thing to do first is to do what we're doing right now, which is to do sort of a Hyperdoc on Hyperdocs, or to walk them through together so that they're familiar with the expectations and the structure of things before you sort of set them free on doing a Hyperdoc on their own. I definitely learned that one the hard way with distance learning in the spring. I gave them to my third graders and they enjoyed them, but they needed a little more structure and guidance in how to move through and what the expectations were. Again, reiterating that a Hyperdoc is simple. So it can feel overwhelming. There's all these pieces and benefits to a Hyperdoc, but there's actually only two things that you need to learn in order to use a Hyperdoc. It's simply hyperlinks and a digital document. It's that easy. So the digital document could be Google Docs. It could be a Google Slides if you're building out a longer unit. It can even be a Google Maps. And just like we shared with the Hyperdoc that we're going through today, the length and the depth of your Hyperdoc can depend on the amount of time that you want to spend with your students on something. So on the left, we see just a really simple version of a Hyperdoc that just has pieces that have students exploring, explaining, and applying. And then the right two examples are a little more in depth. You can add other pieces in. So we're going to take just another moment to explore some Hyperdocs. So here is a really nice curated example of all different ways that you can use Hyperdocs. It's a Padlet, and I'm going to go ahead and drop the link into the chat. So I'd like you to take just 1 minute until 2:45 and just browse through these examples on the Padlet and see if you find anything that looks like is a way that you might be able to use Padlet, or that gives you, a Hyperdoc, or gives you an inspiration or idea for something you could make for your own class. So just take a minute to browse through that Padlet linked in the chat. All right, going quickly today. Did anybody see anything? Feel free to unmute your mic or put it in the chat, something that sort of jumped out at them or felt applicable to what they're teaching right now. I know that was really fast.
I was looking at the school, like back to school rules one. I thought that was neat for, setting up routines about anything. I had a few different books that they could listen to and then, write their reflections.
Oh, that's a great idea. That would be totally applicable now, because it feels like we're having these weird back to school moments and bringing students back into the physical classroom. Good to revisit those pieces. Great. And Jenna's adding in the chat, there's a semicolon one and history ones, and Jan's adding one on the US Constitution. Awesome. Thank you so much. And linked on the right-hand side on that image that sort of looks like an iPad is your basic Hyperdoc template. So that is in the slides for today, which again are in the chat. And so that's sort of your basic framework that you can use. You can open it and make a copy and then get started plugging in your content right away. Or you can look back at that Padlet and grab one that's already made and make a copy and tweak it to fit your own needs or your students. A lot of them are ready to go right away, which is amazing. So you can grab those and use those right away. The next piece I wanted to go over is just sort of the pedagogical workflow of a Hyperdoc. So again, we see highlighted in yellow those three pieces that we're covering today in our Hyperdoc on Hyperdocs, which is explore, explain, and apply. But there's some other pieces that you may want to add. Just like an agenda or a typical lesson plan, it's really nice to start with a piece that engages or hooks your learners. So today our engage was not on the Hyperdoc, but I started with you thinking about the concept of a mixtape and applying that to a Hyperdoc. And then it's nice to add a piece for your students to share or reflect or extend their learning. I found that extend piece really helpful with distance, and I imagine with hybrid learning, when students are working at their own pace or they have extra time where you would like them to keep working and extending, a way for you to collect all of those extension activities in one place and have them know how to access them and have them connected to your lesson is really, really helpful. It helps to sort of soak up some of that time for those early finishers so that you can go back and work with the kids that are still working on your lesson or unit. So I just want to call out again that a Hyperdoc has different forms. A Hyperdoc can be a slide deck, just like we're working through today. Typically, I see people that are using slide decks as Hyperdocs to sort of encapsulate a unit. So you can have an entire scope and sequence in a slide deck that you refer back to often. That can be a really helpful tool. You can also use a Google Doc, like the examples that we saw earlier. And one that Jason, who wasn't able to be here today, but one way that he loves to create Hyperdocs is to actually do Google Maps. So you can pin different places on a map, and ICGN nodding her head, and add images or details or information for different places. So I just want to open that so that you can get an idea of what that looks like. This is one I haven't really explored and created as much as I would like to as a teacher, but it's a really cool way to sort of bring that lesson to life. So you can see that this teacher created a Hyperdoc on national parks, and they've marked different places for students to visit on the map for different pieces of their lesson. So for their engage, they're exploring Yosemite, and you can see that they've added an image and then description. So you could imagine, you know, if you had a story maybe that took place in different settings throughout the book, it would be really cool to make a Hyperdoc that linked to those different places. Or again, like talking about the history Hyperdocs, how amazing would it be to create one that was on a map? All right, so the next thing I'd like you to do is, we've had a chance to sort of look at what Hyperdocs can look like, look at the three different examples with slides or docs or maps, and to look at some of those examples on the Padlet. The next thing I'd like you to do is to go back to that Hyperdoc that we first started with, and I'll put it in the chat for you so it's easy for you to grab, and visit this Padlet. So think about what we've learned so far about Hyperdocs, how they can be like a mixtape or a lesson plan template or an agenda, and then visit this Padlet that's linked in the task, and go ahead and share a topic that you might want to create a Hyperdoc for. And then if you have time, you can reply to 2 other people with comments, suggestions, or additions. So I'll give you about 2 minutes to add to this Padlet something that you think you might want to create a Hyperdoc for. And I'll put the direct link to the Padlet in the chat. Great, I see science-based interactive lessons. Kate's adding. one on ocean plastic pollution. Yeah, Jenna, history with Google Maps. And Janie, digital citizenship. PD, what a great idea, Janie. And of course, being a teacher, my mind always goes back to beg, borrow, or steal. Like I read these ideas and I'm like, there has to be one of those already made out there, rather than reinventing the wheel. What can I find that's already made? So that's actually a perfect segue to the next part of our presentation. So remember that the purpose behind a Hyperdoc is to make learning more engaging, interactive, and inspiring, right? Just like a mixtape, we want our students to feel excited, have a sense of meaning that's curated and collected for them. And it always helps to have something that's ready to go, that's already built for you, that you can tweak or customize, but sort of a starting place. So I'm really excited because within our slides, what we've done next is we've collected for you tools that you can use for each part of a Hyperdoc, and then an example Hyperdoc that utilizes that tool for each of the stages. So for example, taking a really close look here at this engage slide, some of the great ways that you can engage your students with Hyperdocs is by collecting YouTube videos. You can start with a podcast, maybe even a StoryCorps podcast. I love those. Starting with images or memes or quotes. And so then in this middle column, we have an example of a Hyperdoc that uses that particular tool for that section. So Janie was just adding, she was thinking of doing something about digital citizenship, not planned, but here the first example is a Hyperdoc on how students can take a look at their digital footprint. So again, if you go ahead and click here, this is one that's a Hyperdoc that's already ready to go, that has students thinking about how to make sure that their digital footprint is positive, polished, and prepared. So I'm not going to go through all of these. I just want to make sure that you know that that is a resource for you that Jason and I have collected from the Hyperdoc book, examples of tools that you can use for each of those sections of a Hyperdoc, and there's example Hyperdocs right in there that use each of those. One that I do want to call out that's timely is that if you look, at the very last one, so Janie also talked about maybe making one for back to school. There's one that's already made. There is one on hopes and dreams, which would also be really great for back to school. And on Extend, there's one that's already made for Earth Day. So we know that Earth Day is coming up this week. So that's a resource that you can grab and go and take away, and you've got an Earth Day lesson ready to go with your students. So again, those are all linked in the slides, ready for you to take and to assign to your students. So just as a recap, of what Hyperdocs are and what Hyperdocs are not. They're a transformative, interactive way of teaching, and they're not just a digital version of a worksheet, right? We're trying to get students to engage in each of those key pedagogical pieces. They are engaging, which makes them not the same old way of teaching, right? We're curating and collecting all of our resources in one place. And one of the things that I find that's amazing about that is not only is it really good for your students because they could walk through the lesson at their own pace, but it's super helpful for you as a teacher. I know that prior to using Hyperdocs, I had my video YouTube playlist on one piece and my slide deck in another piece, but having it all together in one makes it a really helpful tool. Even if it takes a little bit of time in the beginning to put those pieces together, then you have that, right, for the future. So anytime you want to go back to teach that lesson or unit, you have all of your resources in one place. So they're a way for you to deliver your instruction and collect your materials. They're not just a Google product. And we're finally going to end by applying. So I'm not going to have you do this because we're running quick on time, but I just want to remind you that all of those resources are in the slides, so you can take them and use them. One piece to consider when you are sharing your Hyperdocs with your students is don't forget to think about your sharing settings. So you're going to want to think if you want to make one that all your students are collaborating on together, or if you're going to go ahead and assign to your students individually. So just be cognizant and think about that as you're assigning. There's a place for you to extend your learning on the slides. There's links to Hyperdocs that are already curated and collected for you on Teachers Give Teachers. You can search on Instagram and Twitter the hashtag Hyperdocs or Hyperdoc. You can visit their website, and there's even a Facebook group. And then bringing it back full circle, back to the mixtape analogy, I'm gonna have you guys close out today by go ahead and dropping, you've graduated, you're all mix masters, go ahead and drop your DJ name in the chat. My initials are SS, so I'm gonna sign out from DJ Crafty Sound, and I'll stick around if anybody has any questions. Thank you so much for joining. Kate, what is yours? Knife power. Oh my goodness. All right. Thanks, DJ Knife Power. Thanks for joining us.
I double as a bouncer, I think, in my DJ role.
Yeah, that sounds pretty serious. Janie, Jack and Players. All right. Jack and Liquid Loco. Perfect. Thanks, Jenna. Jack and Logic. All right. Thanks, Jan. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And I'll stay if you have any questions. If not, go enjoy your afternoon.
Thank you very much.